Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of RE033, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. If you like this sort of content, please hit the like button, and if I've earned it, please hit the subscribe button. More importantly, let's get on to the story. Clipboard, written by RegalLegalEagle. Chisroy could feel his heart sputtering in his chest as he looked up at the building site before him. It was simply massive. He had no idea how many people were working on the structure, but it had to be a lot. He could see movement all around the base, small figures like Rizat and Nurin to massive beasts like Rin and Chlores. How was he supposed to figure out who to talk to? He looked over at his father, who nodded and motioned towards the scene before him. Just like we talked about, find the boss, tell him your skills, and you'll have a job by the end of the day. Simple as that.
But how? How do I find the boss?
Chisroy gulped nervously as he looked at the sheer scale of the work going before him. Watch the easy part. Find the human. If there is more than one, just find the loudest one with a clipboard.
What's a clipboard?
He asked, and his father traced a rectangle in the air with the smaller fine work hands. A bit of wood, about this big, but they clip things onto it. I'm not sure why they use those instead of data slates, but trust me. You find a human with a clipboard, he's going to be in charge, or know who is. Chisroy considered this for a moment and gave his father another nervous glance. You'll do fine. Humans value our labor greatly, and our family name is well known.
Why can't I come to work with you, or why can't you talk to them for me?
Rizmat chuckled at that and reached out to give his son a reassuring pat on the back with his larger upper right hand. Because you are not a master yet, and because you need the experience of doing this on your own. And before you ask, humans don't just want master masons. They'll use any skill so long as you work hard. Now go. With a light shove, Chisroy was sent tumbling forward. He kept walking then, crossing the street before entering the dirt and gravel lot surrounding the base of the structure being assembled. All around him, workers were walking, or even jogging with speed and purpose, some calling out to one another, some hauling supplies or tools, but everyone seemed to be doing something. He tried to look around for the clipboard his father mentioned, but he had to quickly scurry out of the way of several of the other workers who seemed to move only in straight lines from point to point and not let anyone deter their paths. He wandered around for a few minutes and then finally saw him. He'd seen humans before. His father knew a few. They never seemed very impressive when compared to the other FTL-capable species. They possessed only 2 grabber hands. They lacked protective shells or exoskeletons. The raw strength was average at best, and often subpar. Not to mention, their sensory organs were very limited, even if they possessed a wider average range than most species. But they clearly made it work somehow. The human was wearing a bright yellow hull of some kind, and wearing a bright green vest over more simple and subdued clothes. He recognized the heavy brown boots right away. Steel-toed, they were called. The figure was standing on a ferrocrete square with a hole in the center of it. He was leaned over, looking down, lifting his hand and clipboard up to his face. Is it shit? Chisroy froze for a moment as he heard the figure curse. Was the human upset? Is it shit? The figure repeated. He couldn't hear the reply, but the human just nodded and straightened. Good. The human began to walk away. Then Chisroy gathered his nerves, feeling his heart flutter still, as he quickly jogged over to try and catch up with the moving human.
Hello, human. My name is...
I don't have any work for you, kid, the human said without even looking over at him. Chisroy's stomach seemed to drop into the pit of his torso at the flat rejection, and he stopped, eyes downcast.
Oh!
But when he stopped like that, the human soon stopped as well, just a few steps further, and looked back at him. What? Is that it? Come on, kid. You haven't done this before? The human snorted, usually a sign of agitation or anger. But for some reason, Chisroy thought that he was amused.
What? No, sir.
As soon as he said that, the human shook his head. Should have known. All right. The human lifted his wrist to check the chronometer he wore, it seemed, before waving Chisroy to follow him. Look, kid, let me guess you're a stonemason, based on your tools and the fact that you're a Frizzman. But I'm not at the finish work yet, not even close. So what use is a stonemason when I don't need any frescoes yet, huh? Chisroy nodded as the rejection was now explained.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Started to turn away, to leave when the human quickly called out to him. "Kid, stop, stop!" The human walked back to him, turning him around by the shoulder. Shizroy gulped a little, looking up at the slightly taller figure before him. He knew humans had a variety of forms, but this one was fairly bulky. Thick forearms with light hairy coating and a protruding fat sack on his torso. Though Shizroy had certainly seen much larger fat sacks, it just wasn't common for any Frisman but noble castes. "You're supposed to then tell me that you need a job no matter what, that you'll learn and you won't take no for an answer." Shizroy blinked.
I am?
"Yes, go on, tell me that." The human let go of his upper shoulders, and then Shizroy hesitated before replying,
I need a job no matter what. That I'll learn, and you won't, I won't take no for an answer.
He leaned back as the human's face suddenly got red, and he bellowed out, "The feck is this? Some little shithead coming off the street telling me what to do? The set of balls on you! Where the feck do you get off? Get the feck out of here before I kick your ass!" Shizroy gulped and prepared to run for it when the human's face seemed to return to normal, and he reached out to grab his shoulders. Kid, don't run. It's part of how this works. Jesus, you had that kicked puppy dog look. I'm not really mad at you, kid. It's a ritual thing in construction."
But you cursed.
When Shizroy mentioned that, the human laughed and shook his head. "Boy, you really are new to this. This is construction, kid. You're going to have to get used to swearing. You'll be hearing it a lot, especially human swears. I've noticed how quick you Xenos pick up on our curse words. Anyway, what you're supposed to do is yell back at me, and we go back and forth for a bit. Then, if I like you, I give you a job. And if not, I'll tell you another job site to check out for a job, where you'll do it all over again. But here, I'll go easy on you. I can see you're nervous. Just come on, kid." The human turned and waved him once more. Now Shizroy was more confused than anything else, but there might apparently be a prospect of a job, so he followed along. The human stopped then before a section of building where some large chloris were hanging off girders, trying to push some glass pieces into a setting, but they weren't fitting. "Hey!" the human called up, cupping his hands around his mouth, using the clipboard to try and project his voice. "Hey!" He tried again, then picked up a small rock from the ground and handed it to Shizroy. "Here, hit that one on the back." Shizroy looked at the rock, then at the human, who nodded at him and pulled his upper arm back, before letting the rock shoot forward, tossing the rock up several floors to hit the chloris in the back. The beast looked back and down, then, which was when the human shouted out once more, "The other way!" and made a rotating gesture with his raised finger. The workers gripped the massive slabs of glass in their multiple furred arms and turned them around, at which point they slid into place easily. Shizroy could see them waving back, but the human was already walking away, so he had to jog to catch up. "All right, kid. What's your name?"
Shizroy.
"All right, Roy. I think I've got a job for you, but instead of tossing rocks at my more oblivious workers. Just up there." He trailed off at that as they saw a gilded Land Roller drive into the worksite. "Ah, feck. Management. Got to deal with this first." Without any other inputs or idea of what to do, Shizroy followed after the human, who stood near the vehicle and waited. So Shizroy stood to his side and also waited. After a few seconds, the chauffeur, a well-dressed six-eyes Kasatan, got out and walked along the vehicle to open the back doors. With that, a feathered Chisnokawa stepped out.
"So, as you can see, the project is coming along very nicely. We're currently ahead of schedule in several sectors and should be ready for the shareholder meet next week instead of next month."
Shizroy stepped back then as the Scrabian pulled his considerable bulk out of the back of the vehicle then. They weren't what they used to be thanks to the Commonwealth, but generations of enslaved, and his people were rightly worried about their kind.
"Who's this?"
The grayish-green shelled Xeno asked and pointed a grubby finger at the human. Shizroy was a little curious as to why the Scrabian would hire a human considering their history. "I am the foreman," he replied.
"What are you doing here?"
Shizroy could see the creature's tiny wings flutter in anger and annoyance. "I am running things," the human replied simply once more.
"Running things? I didn't hire you. Who put you in charge? Did you know about this?"
The Scrabian looked down at the Shirsenkawa, who was clearly confused.
He was here on day one. He's been running things the whole time. I just, assumed he was in charge. I thought, you knew."
She shrugged at that as the Scrabian chittered angrily.
I hired you to run this project. Why would I hire a human? Why would he be in charge?
At first, the avian looked from the Scrabian over to the human and then back, clearly confused.
Because he's human? Then she kept going, but I'm just an architect. I don't know how to run a job site.
She protested, feathers ruffling a bit as she looked worried.
Who hired you?
The obviously upset Scrabian asked the human. Me. I hired me. I showed up and made sure they started paying me a fair wage. Don't worry, it's less than half of what she makes, even if I'm worth twice as much. The human didn't seem worried in the slightest, despite his apparent fraud in his job position. The Scrabian looked so shocked he gasped for air, while the Chisenkawa just tilted her head.
Half as much? Then how did you afford that wonderful nesting day present?
I have friends in low places, the human said with a shrug.
This is outrageous.
The Scrabian finally got himself under control enough to talk.
You are fired.
To everyone's surprise, the human just laughed. Look, pal, I'm too busy to be fired. You didn't have a foreman because, let me guess, all your buddies told you just to focus on an architect and set a budget, and the rest would sort itself out, right? That because humans like me show up when new projects get started, and we take over. That's what we do. Have you got any idea how hard it is to keep a dozen different cultures all working together and not fighting each other? Because humans have lots of experience with that. From Italians to the Irish, the Chinese, and so on and so forth. And before that, wild dogs and stuff. We've got pack mentality ingrained in our DNA. So one of us shows up, takes charge, and gets paid way less than we should to show you how good we are. Then, for your next project, you call me up and we argue about the price until we both feel like we've screwed each other over, and that's how it works. Shizroy couldn't believe the confidence of the figure standing next to him. He'd never dream of doing anything like this in a million years, least of all to a Scrabian.
This is preposterous. What is your name, human? George. I'll make sure you never work in the city again.
When the Scrabian growled that out, however, the Kassatian chauffeur stepped up and whispered something into his hearing crevice. After a moment, Scrabian looked over at the chauffeur.
What? All of them?
To which the Crassian nodded.
And you say the project is ahead of schedule?
He looked over at the Chisingawa, then.
Yes, sir. And despite the extra overtime and other expenses a little under budget, he has the very amazing technique where he screams at his vendors and they give him slower prices. I keep thinking they'll never sell to us again, but I'm told the vendors fight over who gets to sell to us. I really don't understand the intricacies yet.
She looked back at the Scrabian, who seemed to nervously rub his fat sack with his hands.
Very well. You keep your job, George, the foreman. But you better deliver on this project, human.
The Scrabian looked around the site for a moment and then climbed back inside the Land Roller. See you tomorrow, Susie. The human nodded as the Chisnakawa waved, and then the moving on before the vehicle had even left. Come on, Roy. Shizroy turned and followed along behind George as they headed to a trailer on the edge of the lot. Right, so I've got a job that you can do until I need a mason work for the floors and frescoes and stuff.
You aren't worried about Scrabian?
He asked, still rather surprised by the turn of events. What?
That fat-ass beetle? Feck no. Like I said, I'm too busy to let him fire me. Anyway, here.
He opened the door and Shizroy found himself in a chilled room with all sorts of pink boxes on little shelves around the central table.
So with a project this size, there's about 10 birthdays per day. That's hatch day for you. I've just been giving them the treats plain, but with you here, we can get fancy.
Shizroy frowned as he watched the human set his clipboard down and then pull a pink box from the shelf. He set it on the table and then opened it up to reveal a large baked confection of some kind. Shizroy could smell fruit and flour and some sort of citrus.
I am not a baker.
What's with all you Xenos who come in thinking you only know how to do one thing? Haven't any of you thought about using what you know and applying it to something else? Listen, you're a stonemason, right? Decorative work. You carve out all those intricate little patterns and faces and images and crap onto stone all the time. So instead of carving in, you're just applying on top.
The human walked to the refrigerator at the back of the room and pulled out a squeezy tube filled with some sort of red substance.
This is the universal frosting. Every species who works on my project can eat this.
Shizroy hesitantly took the offered tube. handling it in his larger hands, then handing it down to his more dexterous, smaller hands as he felt it over.
What am I supposed to do with it?
The human flipped through several pages of his clipboard and then pulled one out, setting it on the table. Here, this is a list of everyone with a hatch day today. He ran a finger down the list of 9 names to show Shizroy. Then this is how you say happy birthday, or hatch day, or whatever in their native language. Just copy it down on the cakes, or pastries, or whatever. This little dot here, he showed Shizroy the red circle on the front of the pink box, corresponds with the dots on the paper for who gets what. Sure enough, Shizroy saw that each name had a different colored dot next to it. There were some repeats, of course, but clearly the human had gotten species-appropriate treats for all of them.
Why are you doing this?
He asked. Giving you a job. Come on, Roy. You're not supposed to ask me that. You're supposed to just say thank you and get to work. The human laughed.
No, the treats,
Shizroy clarified. Oh, well, it's a human trick. You want people to enjoy coming to work, to make them feel welcome and like a part of a pack. A good job isn't just about getting paid. It's also about making a pack with your co-workers and looking out for each other. Speaking of, what's your hatch day?
The human picked up his clipboard again, clicking his writing implement as he got ready to use it. The third morning of the 5th annual section.
Right, and you are Reformed or Orthodox?
Shizroy was a little surprised the human knew to ask that. Reformed?
With that, the human nodded and slapped Shizroy on the back, making him stagger forward a little. Welcome to the back, Roy. Don't feck up. With that, the human collected his things and walked out of the chilled trailer. He'd never been part of a pack before. After realizing he'd been left alone, he blinked and then looked at the paper and then squeezed tube in his hands. He had no idea how to decorate with frosting, but this was his job now, so he supposed he'd learn quick. After all, George, the foreman, was counting on him. Though now he had a better understanding of how humans got things done. They just did them. He shrugged at that and looked down at the paper and started his first task of his first job. Something told him working for a human would teach him a lot. Perhaps not about stonemasonry, but about everything else. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.